How's it going, guys? illumGnating. Slightly altered tonight. As some of you guys know, I have a bunch of surgeries. It's going to start happening Saturday, I think. Tomorrow's my son's birthday, so happy birthday to Nagwal. And today we're up in the hills and discovered a small, it's not really a bush, but sometimes poppies grow where there's one stem and then a whole bunch of pods, and so it's kind of a bush. So manna from heaven for somebody struggling with the kind of issues that I'm having at the moment. Especially consider I live in a country where dentists can't prescribe opioids. So I was thinking about the stream tonight, and I realized that there's quite a storied connection of opium and the occult and art of all kinds. And it actually is a really interesting plant, and it's a really interesting substance. The problem, of course, is that it's dangerous and addictive, and I am in no way suggesting that anyone should ever use it for anything but management of pain. However, the reason that so many artists, Edgar Allan Poe, Baudelaire, every great rock artist you can think of, a different form, of course. But the reason it's been used so prevalently is that it sort of knocks down the wall between the conscious and the subconscious mind. And that is the gateway to all these denizens of the occult realm. I happen to be of the opinion that the spirits and demons of the Goetia and, Aleister Crowley's work are not real in the same way that the IRS is real, to borrow a line from the late great Robert Anton Wilson. But they're not unreal either. But it suits us best, I guess, long story short, to think of them as parts of the mind that we're interacting with. And so, Diary of a Drug Fiend by Aleister Crowley, probably the worst book I've ever read in my life. It's an amazing thing that guy, when he wrote Magic and Theory and Practice and Book 4 and, parts of the Book of Lies and many of his other works, amazing, literary pyrotechnics, the words are blazing off the page. I've never seen anything like it. In fact, the only thing that I've seen that comes close to it, I think, is Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike, the 33rd degree Mason from the Civil War era. It's not as, the high points aren't as high, but it's much more consistent. Crowley would have these flashes of incredible, literary pyrotechnics, but then it would turn into hideous garbling and ego and just, stomach turning a lot of times. Where was I going with that? Got to get the train back on the track here. What the fuck was I talking about? See, this is the other issue with these things. You can forget what the fuck you're talking about pretty easily. Where the hell was I going with this? Man, that's crazy. I don't know. Something about how these things, do give us better access to these nether regions of the mind. But that's what I was saying. I was saying that Crowley's literary pyrotechnics, were not present in his novels. Like, for some reason, he could do it when he's writing prose, but then he tries to write a book, and he was like the worst author that I've ever encountered in my entire life. I mean, Diary of a Drug Fiend fucking sucks. Before we get into the material tonight, though, I have a quick story, something similar to that. I once arrived at a beach in the middle of the night in Santa Cruz, California, and I go down to the water, and there's this guy with a big clock around his neck, just like Flavor Flav. but he's a white dude and obviously sketchy, and he's got some sketchy dudes with him, and they're obviously talking about something sketchy when we walked up. But I was just curious, you know, so I start talking to the guy, and when he speaks, everything he says is brilliant and it rhymes, and then he would start freestyling, and it was a train wreck. It was not clever, nothing rhymed, it was out of time, like, you know, for some reason it just reminded me of this whole thing of Crowley and his weird inability to write a novel, but, you know, blazing light on the pages of his prose. So I don't have a ton of a plan, a very clear plan tonight. I just remembered that, you know, back a couple of years ago, I used to pretty consistently, you know, we would look up the Book of the Law with the commentary, and I would do commentary on that, and people seemed to really like it. And I know that we got a little bit into the Book of the Law with the commentary, and then I just stopped and never finished it. So I was thinking maybe we would start over with that, or we could do bibliomancy and just randomly open up Morals and Dogma and read some of that and have some commentary. That could go well, or it could be lame. I don't know. It is an extraordinary book full of Masonic secrets, and it is an absolute treasure trove of information about the occult, esoteric traditions from all over the world, the Eleusinian mysteries. It's actually, with my patrons, every week I do about a half hour of reading from the book with commentary, and that's been going on for 4 years, I think, 4 or 5 years, and we've only done 2 degrees. So the book is, each chapter is a degree of Freemasonry explained until you get to the 33rd, and then there's nothing written, because the secrets of the 33rd degree are only transmitted orally. They are not written down ever anywhere. So how about this? I'll let you guys pick. Whoever puts in the chat first, Morals and Dogma or commentary on the Book of Lies. By the way, how's it going, Diversified Farmer? I want to let you guys know that every year I do an 11/11 synchronicity stream where I talk about the underlying mechanisms that I believe are responsible for synchronicity, and stories that I, from my experiences with 11/11, which all occurred, by the way, well before I had ever heard of it from anyone. So that has always struck me as really interesting, you know, that I stumbled upon this 11/11 thing without having any preconceptions. You know, I had not seen it on the internet. I'd never heard anything about it. And yet it presented itself in exactly the way you would expect, right? And then after that, I'm going to eat some Psilocybe natalensis, which is a strain that I hear is far superior to any other mushroom strain. And I'm going to play music for a few hours, partly in an attempt to raise more money for the surgeries. We have the first 2 covered, but I still need the hernia surgeries on both sides. Apparently it's like moderately dangerous not to do anything about it, and if they get worse, the price will 10x. So it's not like I'm dying or something, but it, you know, not really the best thing to let it ride. So let's see if anyone has made a request. No. All right, well, let's see what happens if I just randomly open this monstrous book here. Oh, yeah. I mean, you almost can't go wrong. It's 1,000 pages. Let's back up just a little bit, do it a little bit less random. Oh yeah, this is good. This is really good. It's basically on the nature of deity. I'm just trying to find a reasonable place to start, but good actions are not always followed by happiness, nor evil ones by misery. How can this be so? Good actions are not always followed by happiness, nor evil ones by misery, though often this fact is more apparent than real through virtue A war against the passions, full of dignity, but full of sorrow and pain, has the latter as its condition, yet the pains that follow vice are greater, and virtue conduces most to health, strength, and long life. Through the peaceful conscience that accompanies virtue, though the peaceful conscience that accompanies virtue creates internal happiness through public opinion generally decides correctly on men's characters and rewards virtue with esteem and consideration. So, one of the things I remember from this chapter a little bit before that is more interesting than what he's talking about. Secrets of the Grateful Dead topic. You know, I was thinking about that just the other day. Yeah, I'll talk about the Grateful Dead again, for sure. But what he was saying here, you know, is that if there is a just and good God, which I'm not entirely convinced of, you know, I think of the deity, if there is one, as a sort of, you know, field that interpenetrates everything. And I've had this feeling since I was probably a teenager that what actually happens is that in the beginning, you know, there was the logos. That's pretty much correct. And it was basically just the oscillating wave. That's the vibration that is the word. And so it was a very fundamental baseline type of awareness. And then as creation complexified, the intelligence that interpenetrates everything also becomes more sophisticated. So the creation and this creator are actually developing each other. And this would have to be the case if you believe in the principle of sufficient reason or the law of necessity that says that everything in the universe happens because it has to happen. Everything is as it is because it must be and cannot be any other way and sustain creation. And that absolutely makes sense to me. So, this also kind of implies that this deity is everything. It's not just love and light and good and happiness and unicorns and you know, we're not sitting around in heaven blowing lines of fairy dust and huffing unicorn farts. You know, if there is a deity, it's the totality of everything. It's all the evil and hatred and vengeance and, you know, vitriol and everything. It's all of it. It's life and death and beauty and horror and all of it. And it wants to experience all of these things from every possible point of view because its real objective, if you can call it that, is self-knowledge, just like us. You know, microcosm, macrocosm. On the micro level, we are searching for identity, and then we are searching for a path to execute creation that is in accordance and congruent with the identity that we discover, you know? And so I think the universe, the only real possible point of it is that same process, you know? And we are like the sentient organs that are here to, we're the spelunkers in the cave of God's psyche or whatever, you know? But what I was saying before is that even if you don't think about it in the moral sense, right? Because I think anthropomorphizing the universe and the deity is probably a bit ridiculous. So even if you don't think about it in terms of morality, like human morality, all systems tend towards homeostasis in the universe, right? That's where it's all going. And so everything is balancing to zero, basically. You know, there are fluctuations of nothingness, basically. The universe is fluctuations of different, what did they say? The mathematicians came up with a term for this. Zeros of different orders of magnitude in flux, right? Nothingness of different orders of magnitude. At any rate, though, the point is that when we see virtue rewarded with pain and suffering, and we see evil people prospering, and then people take that and then they say, there must not be a God. Because if there was a God, there wouldn't be babies getting run over by tanks in Gaza, and there wouldn't be good people, you know, their children get cancer and all of this kind of stuff. and evil people, getting rich, staying rich, exploiting, conning. What is that? But the point that he made a little bit earlier in this chapter was that we do not know if the metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls, reincarnation, is real or not. And if it is, then as far as we know, Adolf Hitler spent the next 6 million lifetimes suffering in equal ratio, in proportion to the suffering that he caused, killing all these people. And so that's an interesting, idea that our balancing of our exchequer, of our account, could extend across multiple lifetimes, and that would allow for a just and loving and fair God. Or even if you get rid of the idea of just and loving, it's in accordance with how we know the universe works on a mathematical basis, that would be the case. That this balance, that this compensation would always be affected. So, the data of this problem are these. First, the principle of merit and demerit within us is absolute. Every good action ought to be rewarded, every bad one punished. God is just as he is all powerful. The third is there are in this world particular cases contradicting the necessary and universal law of merit and demerit. What is the result? To reject the two principles, that God is just and the law of merit and demerit absolute, is to raise the foundations of the whole edifice of human faith. To maintain, then, them is to admit that the present life is to be terminated or continued elsewhere. So that's what he's saying, that the only way to reconcile the fact that we can see that this is a law of the universe, this balance. And so the very fact that there's injustice in the world is an indication, ostensibly, that there is some continuance beyond this life. Otherwise, it is just unjust and fucked. But that's not actually even consistent with the laws of the universe as we know them, right? So that is interesting. And also this reminded me of something that he wrote earlier in the book that I've always really loved. And he says, they are not just because they are his laws. They are his laws because they are just. And that is not just not meaning fair, but it means that things are as they are in the universe because they must be this way. Like I said this earlier, but I'm going to expand on it a little bit. They cannot be any other way, right? They have to be. And so when we question, how can there be some all-wise deity and we have evil in the world, the answer is because the laws are predicated along the lines they are because they couldn't be any other way, and part of that is that there must be light and darkness. And since all that is metaphor, 50 opposite antinomies in order to create balance. So equal parts good and evil, equal parts love and hate, equal parts dark and night, equal parts hot and cold. Has to be that way. The other option is nothingness for all of eternity. So which would you choose? This is called the devil's bargain. The idea that the fallen angels story is really just an allegory for the fact that you could remain in absolute nothingness, which is complete perfection, right? If there's a stain, a blemish, a fracture, a line, anything, it's not perfect. Therefore, God's absolute nothingness at its core. So you can remain in that perfection for all of eternity, or you can have some kind of experience, but it's going to be equal parts good and bad. That's the devil's bargain, Do you choose to fall and descend into matter, or just absolute nothingness for all of eternity. And if you think about the way the Buddha described, nirvana, the cessation of the experience of samsara, it's exactly the same as that, And I've actually wondered if it's not likely that Buddhism is a trap, When you have, let's assume there is like a demiurgos, right? And it's not entirely good. So you have people that wake up. They snap out of the trance of the matrix, out of the mainstream coma, and they decide they want to change things. They want to become light bearers. They want to make the world better. And you have this trap, this snare set up where they're on their mission, and then they see, Buddhism. Annihilation of the self into eternal nothingness. Enlightenment. Oh, that sounds great. And then poof, one less warrior for the light that we have to worry about because he has annihilated himself in nothingness. Brilliant move. Interesting thought, I think. So the moral person who acts well or ill and awaits reward or punishment is connected with the body, lives with it, makes use of it, depends upon it in a measure, but is not it. The body is composed of parts. It diminishes or increases. It is divisible even to infinity. But this something, which has a consciousness of itself and says, I, me, that feels itself free and responsible, feels too that it is incapable of division because it is one, that it is a being, one and simple, that the me cannot be halved, that if a limb is cut off and thrown away, no part of the me goes with it. It remains identical with itself under the variety of phenomena which successively manifest it. This identity, indivisibility, and absolute unity of the person are its spirituality, the very essence of the person. It is not in the least a hypothesis to affirm that the soul differs essentially from the body. By the soul, we mean the person, not separated from the consciousness of the attributes which constitute it, thought and will. The existence without consciousness is an abstract being and not a person. It is the person that is identical, one, and simple. Its attributes developing it do not divide it. Indivisible, it is indissoluble and maybe immortal. If absolute justice requires immortality, it does not require what is impossible. The spirituality of the soul is the condition and necessary foundation of immortality. The law of merit and demerit, the direct demonstration of it, the necessity of immortality to balance karma. The first is the metaphysical and the second is the moral proof. Add to these the tendency of all the powers of the soul toward the infinite and the principle of final causes, and the proof of immortality of the soul is complete. There's a lot to unpack there, but it raises a couple of interesting points. One of them is that, this implication that merit and demerit and the necessity of a hereafter in order to balance these things, karmic balance, is not an impossibility, he says. But for a long time, science has said there is no way that consciousness could survive the death of the body because it is dependent upon neurons that generate it. But now we have Michael Levin, since 2013, I think, has been compiling evidence along these lines. And I just saw another study by a different group, was published the other day, where they have established beyond any doubt at all whatsoever that there is an electrical field that retains information and can store memories. And this other group didn't say anything about the electrical field, but they had determined that all cells are capable of memory. And they apparently don't know about Levin, or they would know why that is. And it sounded from reading the paper they didn't know. But, now we have more than one group. Not like we needed it. I mean, Levin's work is airtight. No one refutes it, or it's not like it's pseudoscience or whatever. Point being that we now know beyond any scientific shadow of a doubt, neurons are not necessary for memory and something really beyond memory, because all of you guys have probably heard about the planariums, these worms that live forever. They're immortal, and Levin cut them into 200 pieces, and they will regrow their brain. It doesn't matter what part you cut. They have a brain, eyes, they're a complex organism. It doesn't matter where you cut them. The piece will develop a new brain, eyes, everything in the right places. And when they first observed this, of course, they went, "What the fuck? This doesn't make any sense." So eventually they figured out that there's sort of like transistors in the animal that can be turned on and off, and you can make it grow two heads, and the genome isn't changed. So where is the information stored? There's no brain, right? So we're talking about something beyond even just like simple memory. We're talking about the ability to determine how the complex proteins, amino acids, and all of the other things, even things as complex as eyeballs, are arranged and how they are generated, and the progeny of these animals that have been manipulated retain the characteristics without the genome changing. Long story short, brain not necessary for, we can't really say consciousness, but if it's true that memory and these other things are connected to consciousness, then it at least implies that a brain is not necessary for consciousness. And then, to take it a step further, there are xenobots, which are literally clumps of dead skin. And there's video of this on my channel. You can watch the debunk of Professor Dave and Billy Carson that I made. You can actually watch a xenobot, which is nothing but a clump of cells that's been animated with electricity like Frankenstein. Make a decision. It's like it's going through a maze, and it realizes like, oh shit, I already went this way. And it turns around and goes back the other way. It's a clump of dead skin. That you can watch it make a decision. I mean, that's like, there's a lot we could talk about. Nested in that crazy shit. But maybe even crazier, single-celled slime mold. I'm not going to go crazy on this one because I think everyone knows about it at this point. But complex cognition does seem to be tied to awareness, right? Animals that are capable of solving more complex tasks seems to have greater self-awareness, and if those things are indeed connected, we have single-celled slime molds that are better at engineering mazes than people. So, at this point, the immortality of the soul is not in conflict with science. It just isn't. It isn't. That's a fact. And then, so that's the first point he was making, right? The next point is that he talks about the human soul as something that is unified and indivisible. But is it? Is it? And while it's true that all of the little organisms and molecules and bacteria and all of these things that make up my body and your body and everyone else's body don't necessarily have any kind of relationship to what the soul would be, right? I don't think the mitochondria in my body are contributing to my psychological or emotional disposition, for example, maybe in some vague way because I've consumed certain foods that cause them to emit different aminos, and there's a relationship to everything, but you know what I mean. Still, it's an interesting thing to consider because I think that things are true on different levels, like nesting dolls, right? So this idea that we and everything else, like the stars and planets are particles in the body of a larger organism. something that Michael Levin seems to believe, which is pretty interesting to me. Speaking of Levin, the cognitive light cone idea, he talks about how really particles exhibit a very fundamental type of intelligence. Like, we don't even know what energy is. We just observe functions in certain areas, and we call that an electron or a proton or a gluon or a muon or a quark or whatever. But it's really just a behavior of nothingness, or we don't know what really. And then you expand what he calls these light cones to different layers of the reality, and then you have chemical intelligence and cellular intelligence, and then biological intelligence, and then sociological and cultural intelligence, and then you have an entire planet's Gaian mind, and then you keep expanding that theoretically until you get to what we would call God, right? And so we know that that's true of us. We have intelligent cells all throughout our bodies that really live completely independent existences that we have no awareness of, and these cells are actually performing pretty complex tasks. We don't really think about that, but there are single cells in our bodies that, single-celled amoebas even and stuff that they have sex, they look for food. Levin has a video where I don't even remember what it is, but it has this tube that it sticks out and gets food swimming around in you somewhere, some single-celled thing that makes decisions, and so this nesting doll sort of concressed intelligence sort of way of understanding the universe probably is correct. And let's continue with the book for a bit. Where were we? God, therefore, in the Masonic Creed, is infinite truth, infinite beauty, and infinite goodness. It is the Holy of Holies, as author of the moral law, as the principle of liberty, of justice, and of charity, dispenser of reward and punishment. Such a God is not abstract, but an intelligent and free entity. It has made us in its image, in micro, as it is the macro prosopis, from whom we receive the law that presides over our destiny, and whose judgment we await. Now, there are some Christian undertones in here that my perspective on this stuff is that we would not exist if there was nowhere further to go with it, right? So although this is a very advanced kind of spirituality for 1851, I think it's still tainted with the Judeo-Christian gibberish. And I think that they also pretended to believe that stuff more than they actually do, because as you progress through the degrees, you'll notice that they start pointing out where Christianity really came from more and more and more, and sort of deprogramming the Judeo-Christian influence from the candidate. And so as you move through this book, you notice that not only are there less and less references that contextualize this knowledge in a Christian way, it increasingly seems designed to erode that and slowly bring the person out of it without causing too much shock. Okay, so it is his love that inspires us in our acts of charity. It is his justice that governs our justice and that of society and the laws. We continually remind ourselves that it is infinite, because otherwise we should degrade its nature. But it would be for us as if it were not, if its infinite nature had not forms inherent in ourselves, the forms of our own reason and soul. When we love truth, justice, and nobility, we should know that it is God we love underneath these special forms, and should unite them all into one great act of total piety. We should feel that we go in and out continually in the midst of the vast forms of the universe, which are only forces of deity, that in our studies, when we attain a truth, we confront the thought of that deity. When we learn right, we learn the will of that deity, laid down as a rule of conduct for its universe. And when we feel disinterested love, we should know that we partake in the feeling of the infinite deity. Then we reverence the mighty cosmic force and mighty cosmic intelligence. It will not be a blind fate in an atheistic or pantheistic world, but an infinite God that we shall confront and feel and know. Then we shall be mindful of the mind of God, conscious of God's conscience, sensible of his sentiments, and our own existence will be in the infinite being of this God. And, again, of course, I'm more inclined to believe in the pantheistic version. And like I said, if we flip to the later degrees in the book, you'll see that there's an abrupt departure from this sort of Christian-flavored rhetoric. The world is a whole which has a harmony. For a deity who is one could make none but a complete and harmonious work. The harmony of the universe responds to the unity of deity. As the infinite quantity is a defective sign of the infinitude of God. To say the universe is God is to admit the world only and to deny God. Give it what name you please. It is atheism to be pantheistic. And I don't think that is a fair statement at all. On the other hand, to suppose that the universe is void of God and that he is wholly apart from it is an unsupportable and almost impossible abstraction. And this is really important because I've always felt that one of the supreme blasphemies, one of the reasons that Christianity is such an utter stain on the face of God, is that it has separated divinity from creation. So, I can remember being a kid on the playground in the Deep South, and people were very fundamentalist Christian. And I already, in second, third grade had developed this idea that, everything was God, that it was a consciousness that exploded. I just always had that in my mind somehow. And I would tell kids this, and, they would say, oh my God, that's blasphemy, to say that you're God or that the grass is God or any of that stuff. And, I would yell then, I am God, because they said, you're going to get hit by lightning. And of course, I did get hit by lightning, but not directly, and it was only a couple of years ago. So they weren't wrong, but they were wrong, And I think that separation of divinity and nature has wrought a tremendous amount of evil in the world. The idea that nature, the animals and the forests and everything are just here to serve the purposes of man. And that may be true to an extent, but, the way a lot of conservative fundamentalists view that and the sort of lack of restraint and the permission that they feel it gives them to just, embrace unbridled, unrestrained greed. Obviously, it's a problem. And you can see the intention of industry and empire being expressed in these religions, which were designed and constructed as methods of control, right? And not just methods of control, but ways to ensure that their objectives, that their agendas would not be obstructed by the common man. If anything, they would be assisted, even in the case that it's not in the best interest of the common man. You see that a lot, where the overlords have people so brainwashed that they will defend their overlord's ability to exploit them, as if they're defending their own rights. It's crazy shit to watch. But I see it every single day. I wish I wouldn't, but I do. Let me check in with the chat and see. How's it going, Johan? Oh, do we have a Christian in the... Watch this. Goodbye. Goodbye. Okay, so shall we continue on with this? I don't know. I was thinking about pulling up the Book of the Law, but I feel like I should designate a specific stream to that because it's kind of its own thing. Maybe we can get away from all this talk about the nature of God, though. Hey, look at that! Just what I was talking about, though. And there's a lot of history in this book, actually, that you won't find in the history books. That's one of the most interesting things about it. Even to the barbarian, he says, no, let's start here. Man's power of apprehending outward truth is a qualified privilege. The mental, like the physical inspiration passing through a diluted medium, and yet, even when truth imparted, as it were, by intuition, even when truth imparted, as it were, by intuition, has been spacious, or at least imperfect, the intoxication of sudden discovery has ever claimed it as full, infallible, and divine. And while human weakness needed ever to recur to the pure and perfect source, the revelations once popularly accepted and valued assumed an independent substantiality, perpetuating not themselves only, but the whole mass of derivative forms accidentally connected with them and legalized in their names. The mists of error thickened under the shadows of prescription until the free light again broke in upon the night of ages, redeeming the genuine treasure from the superstition which obstinately doted on its accessories. And so what he's saying there basically is that truth will strike a man in the heat of revelation, but imperfectly. And so as it passes through his being, it picks up traces of his personality, of his predilections, of his, presuppositions, and it is tainted. But because of the almost orgasmic feeling of this revelation, and also because of the influence of the ego, this person is convinced that they have received an absolutely perfect divine truth. And so earlier in the book, he actually says, man had truth, but wandering in the darkness, he found error. And that's what all of these religions are, that have grown out of what was the primitive truth, that at one time, and this is something I've been discovering more and more and more as I, lived in Peru and going around the sacred valley, digging around and looking at other ancient cultures and whatnot, that the SOL, the sun, soul, that people almost ubiquitously across the entire planet at one point did know that our consciousness comes to us from light. And there was an almost ubiquitous connection also between gold in that consciousness and the sun. And it has more or less recently been discovered that most of the gold in the universe actually comes from the collision of neutron stars. And so that implies that what these people believed was truth, because they did not have astrophysics to tell them about neutron stars. They had San Pedro cactus and peyote and, unobstructed consciousness that, it hadn't been deliberately influenced and deliberately molded and deliberately, dissonance and interference patterns introduced into the antenna of the being. You know, what should be a hollow tube to bring down fire from heaven became a box of radio static. And before that, it really appears that although there were variations in the myths and allegories they used to represent these truths, the Incas, the Aztecs, the Babylonians, Syrians, Egyptians, many of the North American tribes, they all understood more or less what was happening, why it was happening, and how it happened. And wandering long in the darkness, we lost the truth and found error. And what he just explained is basically how that happened. I guess I don't have water. The most grand objects of nature perpetually constrain men to think of their author. The Alps are the great altar of Europe. The nocturnal sky has been to mankind the dome of a temple, starred all over with admonitions to reverence, trust, and love. The scriptures for the human race are writ in earth and heaven. The true scripture is writ large upon the land for those who have eyes to see it. No organ or misery touches the heart like the sonorous swell of the sea or the ocean's waves' immeasurable laugh. Every year, the old world puts out new bridal beauty and celebrates its Whit Sunday, when in the sweet spring each bush and tree dons reverently its new glories. Autumn is a long All Saints' Day, and the harvest is Hallowmass to mankind. Before the human race marched down from the slopes of the Himalayas to take possession of Asia, Chaldea, and Egypt, men marked each annual crisis, the solstices and the equinoxes, and celebrated religious festivals therein, and even then, and ever since, the material was and has been the element of communion between man and God. Nature is full of spiritual lessons to a thoughtful man. Damn. He dissolves the matter of the universe, leaving only its forces. He dissolves away the phenomena of human history, leaving only immortal spirit to analyze. He studies the law, the mode of action, the forces, and the spirit which make up the material and the human world, and cannot fail to be filled with reverence, with trust, with boundless love of the infinite deity, who devised these laws of matter and of mind, and thereby bears up this marvelous universe of things and men. Science is a New Testament, and the beatitudes of philosophy are profoundly touching. An undevout astronomer is insane. Familiarity with the grass and the trees teaches us deeper lessons of love and trust than we can glean from the writings of Fenelon and Augustine. The great truth is ever open before mankind. The eternal flowers of heaven shed sweet influence on the perishable blossoms of the earth. If tomorrow I perish utterly, then I shall only take counsel for today and ask for qualities which last no longer. My fathers will be to me only as the ground out of which my bread corn is grown, dead. They are but the rotten mold of earth, their memory of small concern to me. Posterity? I shall care nothing for the future generations of mankind. I am one atom in the trunk of a tree, and care nothing for the roots below or the branches above. I shall sow such seed only as will bear harvest today. Passion may enact my statutes today, and ambition repeal them tomorrow. I will know no other legislators. Morality will vanish, and expediency take its place. Sound familiar? Sure does, doesn't it? Heroism will be gone. And instead of it, there will be a savage ferocity, like a he-wolf, the brute cunning of the she-fox, the rapacity of the vulture, and the headlong daring of a wild bull, but no longer the cool, calm courage that for truth's sake and for love's sake looks death firmly in the face and then wheels into line ready to be slain. Affection, friendship, philanthropy will be but the wild fancies of the monomaniac, fit subjects for smiles or laughter, or for pity. But, knowing that we shall live forever, we can look on all the evils of the world and see that it is only the hour before sunrise and that the light is coming. And so, also, even we may light a little torch to illuminate the darkness while it lasts and help until the dayspring comes. Eternal morning follows the night. A rainbow scarfs the shoulders of every cloud that weeps its rain away to be flowers on land and pearls at sea. Life rises out of the grave. The soul cannot be held by fettering flesh. No dawn is hopeless, and disaster is only the threshold of delight. And, you know, that is a true and incredibly powerful point. And, you know, we've had to do some slippery thinking in order to engineer the sort of modern spiritual disposition or lack thereof, the uber materialistic ontology. And religion has worn out its welcome on a steel breeze. It is malignant, narcissistic. What is the exclusionary clause of Christianity? Propagates superiority complexes. You know, Zionism, the Goyim are not even human, really, non-Zionist people. And on and on. I mean, you guys know the story. And so people got sick of it. They got tired of the oppression. They got tired of the genocide. We're still experiencing the genocide, really. You know, the cultures that have been crushed. The soul has been sucked out of so many other cultures that weren't quite wiped out, but their life force, their creativity, their culture has been drained by these spiritual vampires we call Catholics and Muslims. And so the response was an extreme reaction for the pendulum to swing in the other direction. And with that came a rise in narcissism, a rise in selfishness, a belief that we are only living for this moment and this life, and therefore anything goes, nothing matters. We have, become almost a nihilist race, globally almost, and those that are not nihilists are still religious for the most part. And whenever you have extremes, you find that the truth is in the middle. And so here we are at the imminentization of the eschaton. You know what I mean? We're on the cusp of World War III. We have the threat of AI and all sorts of other things making humans not so necessary and really more problematic than they're worth in a lot of ways. And suddenly, we have the emergence of science, a reformatted science, that is saying, well, wait a minute. Actually, neurons aren't necessary for cognition. So what does that imply? And things like consciousness may actually emerge from entanglement. Well, entanglement is the mechanism that gives us unity and connection between everything in the entire universe. So, according to one popular theory right now, consciousness itself emerges from the interconnectivity of all things. Like, think about that. And this is coming from science now. the middle ground. Truth is self-substantiating. There is no way to intercede against its emersion. You know, this truth is an emergent property. And the fact that it is asserting itself at the very moment where these two opposing ideas and the consequences of their dominance on the earth threatens to undo life as we know it, the truth emerges in a way that can't be denied by anyone. And it's building in speed, you know, greater and greater rapidity. If you're paying attention. The thing that bothers me a little bit is that, you know, Michael Levin's not a household name, even though this is the most groundbreaking discoveries in scientific history, and, you know, a lot of these other things, they're very much intentionally being kept under the radar. I mean, illumination has been demonized, right? You guys heard that Masonic writing. Does that really sound like satanic evil to you? If it does, you're probably a moron, really, you know. It's not. There's no way. It's just silly. Those things have been demonized so that people wouldn't look at them. You know, this has been going on since Egypt. They actually, the pharaohs and whatnot, realized that the mysteries were legitimately illuminating people, teaching them to read the book of the allegory of nature, to develop their own, you know, internal spiritual processes that actually do something. You know, whereas like doctrinal dogmas, like you can read it all day and try to follow it, and you're just some jackass trying to pretend to be something. Real spirituality is actually internal organic processes. And that's what real illumination is, you know, and it's not denying science. Science is part of it. It's the same basic idea that you know, divine knowledge, basically the same protocol. Abandoning reason and common sense in our spirituality is part of the reason that it's been so laughable for so long. That was probably propaganda. But yeah, what I was saying is the emergence of the right spice at the right time to bring us all above the dirt and grime really implies that there is some kind of integrated intelligence. The wiring under the board knows what it's doing. And, you know, it is interacting with us in a way that demonstrates itself. You know, in the school of the mysteries, we look for certainty, not faith. You know, faith is an insult to intelligence and common sense. So we look into the mind, face, and body of God, which is splattered all around us, and all of the symmetry and magic and mystery, and, you know, I mean, it's kind of hard to miss, really, once your eyes are open. It's kind of everywhere. And as Albert Pike said, you know, the true scripture is written on fucking everything for those who have eyes to see it. What book am I reading from? It's Morals and Dogma, and I have been doing commentary on that book in my Patreon for 5 years. And we've only gotten through like 2 of the degrees out of 32. So, you know, it's like a lifelong project. I didn't mean to do that, but I just didn't realize that it was just, you know, every time you read almost, I mean, honestly, what I just read tonight, it was some of the worst of it, really, because it was kind of like, you know, still tainted with a lot of Judeo-Christian nonsense, and it was kind of God. That's not, most of it is like deep, crazy, ancient knowledge and like history that you don't know about. You know, what I was saying is that the mysteries, when the pharaohs realized that it was illuminating people, they sent spies in to sabotage them. And luckily, Pythagoras and Empedocles had come and studied in different mystery schools in Babylonia and in Egypt, and they brought them back to Greece, and they founded the Eleusinian Mysteries and some of the another school, and the Eleusinian Mysteries being the most important, and the ones that we ended up with, like the Pythagorean school, also just a precursor to the Eleusinian Mysteries. But then the Roman consulate also figured out this is bad, and they sent archons, which is a certain title of a magistrate, in to disrupt and to steal the secrets and create the Bible. And because people realize, wow, there's truth in this. And what it really is the mystery school secrets veiled in a myth. So people see, they feel, they sense there's some truth in it, but it's been convoluted and twisted to be a trap, to make people docile and controllable. So we are attempting to undo those mind-forged manacles. Let me see. All right, I'm going to check in with the other chat real quick. All right, folks, it's getting quite late here. Please do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron, because I am demonetized and also deprioritized, so they really don't push my channel much, and unless you guys support, then I don't get any support, and I have got 4 fucking surgeries to pay for over the next, hopefully 30 days or so. So we really do appreciate your support. It is absolutely integral to my continued existence at this point. So become a patron, or there are options to support in the chat. And I'll see you guys again. Tomorrow's my son's 5th birthday, so I will be back on Saturday night with a stomach full of psilocybe natalensis, some stories about synchronicity, some technical explanations about how and why it happens, what higher orders of symmetry are, how symmetry can interpenetrate different systems. So like form and function can have symmetry, and it's not just a appearance of symmetry. It is an actual physical symmetry. I'll get clearer and deeper on that on Saturday, and then I'll play a bunch of music for a whole lot of hours. Should be great. So thank you guys for spending this time with me, and I will see you Sabado.